When it comes to free agency, and this is true any given year, fans and anyone outside the GM and his team don't necessarily know what's going to happen. People hear rumors that so-and-so is going to be in town or about who the Oilers will interview and whatnot. But it's like a lot of things. You just have to wait and see what happens because there are always going to be surprises. Maple Leafs forward Zach Hyman visited Edmonton recently for one thing, but we don't always know if the smoke is going to turn out to be fire.
The Leafs gave Hyman's agent, Todd Reynolds, permission to talk to other teams and visit cities if he wanted to get a better lay of the land before free agency opens. So he's the player the Oilers want, top six winger from the Leafs, who's played with Matthews, played with Tavares, played a lot with Mitch Marner. Good player who can play with star players, and he does a lot of the heavy lifting along the boards and in front of the net. So it would be a good signing for the Oilers if the cap hit stays around $5 million. Because in this day and age, I think the cap hit is more a concern for the general managers than the term of the contract. If they keep the dollars down, that's what they're going to do.
A legitimate top six forward is something the Oilers have been searching for a while now. And this year presents an opportunity to add one with the extra cap space available. And beyond Hyman, there could be other options via free agency.
They would look at Brandon Saad, Colorado, but he's an American-born player, and it's often hard. You have to maybe overpay for an American if he doesn't want to play in Canada. He's played his whole career in the States. He's played in Denver, he's played in Columbus, he's played in Chicago. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't come to Edmonton, but it's maybe a little more difficult. And Jaden Schwartz, for sure, in St. Louis, who's an unrestricted free agent as well. Not the same player as Hyman, not the same player as Saad. Faster, more of a darter. He's aggressive enough. I don't think he would cost as much as Saad, on a shorter term contract. I think really the player they should have is Hyman if they can work out the cap hit. He's different from the other top six players they have. He plays along the boards. He pushes people around. He gets to the front of the net. He can play with good people enough to contribute, so he's just not digging the puck out for the other guys. And he could play with McDavid or Draisaitl. I think if they can get him, that'd be great. Now, 8 years is too long for a guy who's 29. 7 years is probably too long for a guy 29. 5 years would, ideally probably be the outer limits of a contract for a player that age who plays hard like he does. But the Oilers have to win now. Ken Holland has basically said that. McDavid is 24. Leon Draisaitl is 25. Darnell Nurse is 26. There is three core guys. Nugent Hopkins is 28. It's nice to say we will hang in there for a little bit longer and you dig in your heels on a long-term contract for a player that's longer than you want. But if you're Ken Holland, you're probably saying, I'll worry about the last 3 years of the contract when I have to worry about it, if he's still here as the general manager. He's 3 years into a 5-year contract. So he just has to get some better players right now to help out McDavid and Draisaitl. And that's been a black hole on left wing. If it wasn't such a black hole, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins wouldn't be playing left wing. He's a center. But there's such a black hole there that same thing with Leon Draisaitl playing left wing there. He's a center too. So they have to get some people that are actually left wingers on that line.
Now, the Adam Larsson thing. His signing with the Seattle Kraken came as a surprise. Given his season-ending exit interview with the media not even 2 months ago, it seemed as though Larsson was going to stay with Edmonton, re-sign with them. He was saying all the right things. For fans and even the general manager, that would put minds at ease as far as what to expect from Larsson come free agency, and planning the roster, planning what to do when the expansion draft came around and when free agency came. We don't know exactly what happened behind the scenes, of course.
Well, I don't think it had anything to do with it on the ice. It may have had something to do with Oscar Klefbom, his buddy, his best friend on the team, and his shoulder situation, and not probably playing this year. If, Oscar's not around, maybe Adam doesn't want to be around. It would be 2 years in a row now that Oscar hasn't played. And there may be some other issues, family type issues. His father passed away in Edmonton, 3 years ago, and perhaps the memory of that. So I don't know. We were all surmising. We have no idea. But the dollar figure was virtually the same with Edmonton and Seattle. And in fact, Ken Holland said today he thought he had a deal done a month ago, and it didn't get done. And he made a 3-year offer, multiple offers, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years for Adam. But in the last week, he'd given his agent permission to, talk to Seattle, and then, around the 28th to talk to other teams if that's what he wanted to do, and then hopefully circle back to the Oilers if he still felt that was the best option. So obviously there was no, we're coming back emphatically from Adam or his agent, or the deal would have been done before the expansion draft. And then Ken would have had to, worry about the protection problem with defensemen and forwards, but there wasn't one. And he woke up to a text the morning of the expansion draft saying that Adam was going to Seattle. So I think in his heart of hearts, he was counting on Adam Larsson partnering Duncan Keith. He traded for Duncan Keith, wanting Adam Larsson to play right side defenseman with Keith as the left side second pairing shutdown type pair, and now he doesn't have that. It seemed like, to us, it always seemed like he had a deal and it was in his drawer. He'd had let's put it this way, a verbal commitment. Yeah, I'm going to sign with you, and it was in his drawer. Kenny knew he was coming back, but obviously there wasn't one, and he didn't protect him, and Seattle signed him. So it's unfortunate. 5 years as an Oiler, they've lost. I think a very key part of their team. Now I'm sure it's easier to replace a defensive defenseman than trying to replace an offensive defenseman who gets you 60 points a year, because there are defensemen out there who are shutdown defensemen, and they are usually cheaper than an offensive defenseman. But it's just one more hole for Ken to fill. He filled the Oscar Kleppbaum hole with Duncan Keith for a couple of years. He thought Larsson was coming back. Now he's got to fill the right side defense. He only has so much money, and when you're talking free agency, as we all know, you're bidding against a whole lot of other teams, and you're kind of in a vacuum. You have no idea what the other teams are offering, and you think you've made a good offer, and often you end up overpaying just to get a player. So it's a lot more. Often it's a fruitless, search for whoever you want as a free agent, as opposed to having the player like Larsson in your lineup, pencil him in, and he's gone. It would certainly, Craig, have helped if the Oilers had somebody who was younger that they could say he can definitely do the same thing that Adam Larsson can do. And I'm not saying that Ethan Bear can't be in the top, two pairings, but he's not as big as Adam Larsson. He's not as aggressive as Adam Larsson. He doesn't play the mean game Adam Larsson plays. It's as much like when Jason Smith left, 15 years ago, and the Oilers had, they had Matt Green to replace him on their own team, and they just sent Jason on his way and plugged with Matt Green. Now they have to go out to try to get a defenseman, trade for one, or sign one. And I personally think it's a heck of a lot easier to trade for one than it is to try and sign one. You have to give up assets, but you're only dealing with one team, not talking to a player who may be also talking to half a dozen teams. Well, I think in terms of Barrie, I think Ken Holland would like Barrie back, depending on the term. I think I can see him saying no more than 3 years. We have Evan Bouchard on our team. We can't be blocking Evan Bouchard in terms of a guy who can play the point on the power play. So I can't give you, say, 4 years. I can give you 3 years, but not 4 years. The trouble with Tyson Barrie is He's an offensive defenseman. Evan Bouchard's going to be in the top 6. He's an offensive defenseman. Ethan Bear is kind of in between. He's got some offense because he was a really good offensive player in junior, but he's not a shutdown defenseman. So you can bring Barrie back, but I think Ken would rather just find a plug and play shutdown type defenseman who plays right side than perhaps bring Barrie back, knowing that Darnell Nurse can also play the point in the power play, and so can Duncan Keith to a degree. He has certainly in his NHL career. So whether that's, trying to sign David Savard, who played in Tampa in the playoffs and has a Stanley Cup ring, who's an unrestricted free agent, or, going to Colorado and saying Eric Johnson, he's been on your team a long time, but you're going younger. He's got 2 years left at $6 million a year. What if you wait $2 million of that for both years? And we'll bring in a $4 million defenseman, so it's $4 million out for Larsson, $4 million in for Johnson. But that's a stopgap for a couple of years with an older player. I mean, if they brought Barrie back, it would be fine. But there's no definition. They don't have all the holes filled. Like I said, Bouchard and Barrie are both offensive defensemen, and Bear's not a prototypical shutdown defenseman. So they'd still be looking for a shutdown right side defenseman. And that could be even Travis Hamonic on a 1-year contract, I guess. But at this point in his career, he's probably a third pairing right shot defenseman, not a second pairing. Now, Broberg has played right defense in Sweden as well. So, but he's a left shot. So I guess he could play right shot. I mean, Jonas Brodin in Minnesota's played excellently for the Wild for a lot of years, and he shoots left and plays right defense. So I guess it's a possibility. Samorukov is another defensive defenseman. He's a left shot defenseman. It never hurts to have, right shot defenseman playing right side. You can try to move people around like Chris Russell, who can play both sides, or Caleb Jones before he got traded. But ideally, you'd like guys who shoot right to play right side.
There are needs for the Oilers around their bottom 6 forwards as well, centered around, pun not intended, a third line center, but also other positions. So we can expect some movement.
They're not going to qualify Kara at $1.2 million. They would bring him back at $900,000. So I think they're prepared for him to go to free agency along with Dominic Cahoon, who won't be back, I don't think, either way. I think they're prepared if Kara can get a better deal or get a deal around the same as he's making for the Oilers, he'll probably take it. I think they would take Kara back, but at around $900,000, which is what Nick Bjugstad signed with in Minnesota, a support player. They just don't want to pay $1.2 million. So I wouldn't write him completely off, but I do know that they're looking at, say, Joel Armia in Montreal as a bottom 6 player, but he's a $2.5 million bottom 6 player. 2.5 to 3. He's a very good, right shot winger from Finland who can play left or right side, so he would be really good. But and a third line center, we always talk about the third line center. This has been an ongoing thing for how many years now? We're always talking about a third line center, and you can try to bring in a center who has played some center on the third line, but it's basically a fourth liner, and then you're pushing him up the lineup, and he can't play that well. So I think they have to find some sort of center who can score 12 goals and get 30 points and take some of the offensive heat off Draisaitl and McDavid, and who play 45 minutes out of the game. So you need a third line center who can play 15, 17 minutes or so and give you some offense. So who that is, I have no idea, but it is expensive because the Rangers traded for Barclay Goodrow from Tampa because he's got 2 cup rings and he was playing on the wing, but he's been a center, and they're going to give him $3.6 million a year for 6 years. So I think a third line center for the Oilers is between $3 and $3.5 million, and whether they can find one, I don't know.
On the goaltending end, with Mike Smith tagged to return on a 2-year deal, questions remain about whether or not Mikko Koskinen will be back. He has a contract, of course, and he makes $4.5 million a year. So it's not exactly the easiest contract to move around.
They would go hard for Linus Ullmark, who plays in Buffalo and has been their starter. Had some ankle injuries, but he had a very good save percentage this year in a very poor team. And he's the right age. The Oilers need a goaltender between Mike Smith, 39, and Stuart Skinner, who they like, playing in the minors, who's in his early 20s. They need a 26, 27, 28-year-old goaltender with a little bit of term to take over from Smith. What they do need is a goaltender next season who's good enough that he's the starter, Mike Smith is the backup on a 2-year contract. And if that's a free agent, great. If they have to try to trade for one, whether that's looking to Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh or Jonas Korpisalo in Columbus, who have some term left, they got to look at that too. But they need another goalie. But we always come back to the same elephant in the room, Mikko Koskinen's contract. Unless Holland can find a team that will take Koskinen's contract and the Oilers throw in something as well, and that team would have to have cap room, and Ken would have to send him a prospect or something to take the contract off their hands. I just don't see a lot of market right now for Koskinen, even though I think he's an NHL goaltender, and I know lots of people don't think he is. I just think he's a backup goaltender. And at $4.5 million, that's way too much for a backup goaltender, unless you're backing up Carey Price and you're Jake Allen. So 4.5 is too much. If he was making $2 million, he'd be just fine. But 4.5 is too much, and somehow they have to find a team to take that contract off their hands because they can't bury the whole $4.5 million in Bakersfield if they find another goaltender.